The desert stretched out endlessly, a vast, silent landscape where the sun blazed mercilessly overhead. The only sounds that filled the air were the occasional rustle of the wind and the faint buzz of insects. Jake had grown accustomed to the solitude, living alone in a small, weather-beaten hut made from scrap metal and stone. His days were simple, gathering firewood, collecting water from the nearby well, and tending to his small garden. Life on this barren planet wasn't easy, but it was peaceful. Or so he thought, until one evening, when the quiet of the desert was shattered by an unexpected encounter. It had been another long day under the harsh sun. Jake's arms ached from hauling firewood, and his throat felt dry from the scorching heat. As the evening approached, he set off toward the small creek that ran through the canyon, hoping to gather some fresh water before nightfall. The air was cooling, but the desert still held on to the heat of the day, and Jake felt every inch of it as he walked along the rocky path. He was almost at the creek when something caught his eye, a flash of movement in the distance. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, or perhaps a desert animal, but as he drew closer he saw the figure lying in the dust. His heart skipped a beat. It was a woman, but not like any woman Jake had ever seen. Her skin was pale, almost shimmering in the fading light, and her long silver hair was tangled and covered in dust. She lay motionless, her body curled into a fetal position, as though she had collapsed from exhaustion or injury. Jake's first instinct was to keep walking. After all, he was alone out here, and this was a dangerous place. But something in him couldn't ignore her, couldn't leave her to die alone in the desert. Without thinking, he hurried toward her. When he reached her side, he knelt down and hesitated for a moment. Was she alive? He could see her chest rise and fall slowly, but her breathing was shallow, labored. She was in bad shape. He glanced around nervously, but there was no one else in sight, no sign of danger. Jake wasn't one for heroics. He was just a simple man, far from the big cities and far from any real danger. At least, that's what he told himself. But as he looked at the strange woman, his conscience wouldn't let him leave her. He didn't know who she was or where she came from, but she was human. Or at least, she looked human. Her strange features didn't matter to him. He could see that she was in pain, and he had to help. "Hey, can you hear me?" he said softly, gently shaking her shoulder. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing iridescent pupils that gleamed like a pair of twin stars in the dimming light. She blinked, as though struggling to focus on him. Her lips parted, and her voice came out in a rasp, barely a whisper. "Water, water." She was dehydrated. He had to act fast. He immediately reached into his satchel and pulled out his canteen, unscrewing the cap. The sound of the water sloshing inside was a relief. There was enough for both of them, he hoped. He tilted the canteen to her lips, holding it gently as she drank. She drank greedily, her throat working to gulp down the precious liquid. Jake watched, holding his breath, not knowing what to expect. The woman's body seemed to respond almost immediately. Her skin regained a bit of its glow and her breath steadied. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice stronger now, though still faint. Jake nodded, unsure of what to say. He didn't know what had happened to her, but he was certain that leaving her out here would be a death sentence. "You're welcome," he said simply, his voice rough from the desert heat. She closed her eyes for a moment, as though gathering strength. Then, without warning, she collapsed against him, her head falling against his shoulder. Jake could feel the weight of her body, fragile and trembling. He gently eased her back onto the ground, unsure of what to do next. She needed more than just water. She needed shelter, rest, and time to recover. Jake glanced at the horizon. The sun was almost set, and the air was growing cold. It would be dark soon, and he couldn't leave her out here in the desert overnight. There was no telling who or what might come through these parts. Against his better judgment, he decided to take her back to his hut. With effort, Jake lifted her up, cradling her carefully in his arms. She was light, almost weightless, but her limp body felt like it belonged to someone else, not a living person. She didn't stir as he carried her through the rocky terrain, each step taking him closer to the small shelter he called home. When he reached the hut, he laid her down on the dusty floor inside. His place was small and modest, with only a few comforts: a bedroll, a small stove for cooking, and some basic tools for survival. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency as he removed his boots and knelt beside her, making sure she was comfortable. She was still unconscious, her breathing steady but shallow. Jake didn't know what had happened to her or where she had come from, but something about her seemed otherworldly. Her skin, her hair, the faint glow that seemed to come from within her. She was not like anyone he had ever met, yet she was still a person in need of help, and that was all that mattered, for now. He took a deep breath and stood up, pacing the room in frustration. He didn't know what to do next. Was she an explorer from another world? Was she in trouble? His mind raced with possibilities, but there was one thing he knew for sure. He couldn't leave her here alone, and he couldn't let her die. At least, not without knowing who she was and what had brought her here. As the night stretched on, Jake sat by the fire, watching her closely. There was a tension in the air that he couldn't shake, as though something important was on the verge of happening, something that could change his life forever. He tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes, the strange woman's face would appear in his mind. What had he gotten himself into, and why had she come to him for help? He couldn't answer those questions, but one thing was certain: things would never be the same again. The sun was low in the sky when Jake awoke to the sound of soft footsteps outside his hut. His eyes flickered open, his body stiff from a night of restless sleep. The fire had burned down to embers, casting faint shadows along the walls. For a moment, Jake forgot where he was. His mind still spun from the events of yesterday, finding the strange woman in the desert, bringing her back to his hut. He had never felt such a connection to someone before, and the uncertainty of it weighed heavily on his chest. He hadn't meant to bring her into his life, but now that she was here, there was no turning back. He got up slowly, rubbing his eyes as the cool morning air crept into the room. The woman, Naria, as she had told him her name was still unconscious, lying motionless on the floor. Her breathing was slow and steady, but there was something otherworldly about her that kept Jake on edge. She didn't look like she belonged in the desert. She didn't belong in his simple life. When Jake finally stepped outside to get some fresh air, he froze. Standing outside his hut, bathed in the soft glow of dawn, were a group of women. Tall, regal, and silent, they surrounded his home with a quiet intensity. Each one stood like a warrior, their eyes sharp and their expressions unreadable. They were armed. Strange weapons that Jake had never seen before were slung over their shoulders. The way they moved, the way they carried themselves, made it clear that they were no ordinary women. They were warriors, every one of them. Jake's breath caught in his throat as he instinctively backed away from the doorway, unsure what to do. The woman who had been lying in his hut was now standing among them. She moved with strength, her silver hair glowing faintly in the dim light. Her posture was commanding, yet graceful. Naria looked at him, her eyes meeting his with a look of calm recognition. Despite the fact that he had saved her life, there was a certain weight to her gaze, a quiet authority that made Jake feel small in comparison. As if sensing his anxiety, Naria raised a hand, signaling to the others. The warriors stood still, waiting for her lead. Naria then turned her attention back to Jake, her lips parting as if she was about to speak. Jake didn't know what to say. The last thing he expected when he had helped the injured woman was to have an army of strange warriors surrounding his home. He had no idea who they were, where they came from, or what they wanted. But one thing was clear. This was no coincidence. The woman he had helped wasn't just any traveler. She was part of something far bigger, something he wasn't prepared for. Naria took a step forward, her feet making no sound on the hard ground. She was still weak, her movements slow and careful, but there was a strength in her presence that Jake couldn't ignore. "Do not be afraid," she said, her voice calm but firm. It was the first time Jake had heard her speak, and the sound of it sent a shiver down his spine. The words were strange, foreign, yet somehow he understood. There was a knowing in her voice that made the air feel charged, heavy with meaning. "You have done something that no one else would have done. For that, we owe you a debt." Jake took a step back, his mind racing. "I don't understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" Narya's gaze softened for a moment, but the warriors around her remained motionless. "You saved my life," she said, her tone unyielding. "By doing so, you have bound yourself to us, to our cause. There is no going back now." The world suddenly felt smaller, the desert stretching out endlessly around him. He had never asked for any of this. He was just a man, alone in a vast, empty land, living a quiet life. But now, it seemed, his life was no longer his own. He had become entangled in something much larger than he could have imagined. "I didn't know who you were," Jake said, his voice barely audible.
"I didn't know what you were.
I couldn't leave you out there to die." Narya nodded slowly as though she understood his words. She stepped closer, her presence almost overwhelming. "Your actions have been noted, Jake.
You have shown kindness, a quality that is rare in this universe. For that, we owe you."
Jake stared at her, trying to make sense of her words. "What do you want from me?" "We do not seek to harm you," Narya said, her eyes searching his face. "But your life has been touched by ours, and there is a bond between us now. You must come with us." "Come with you?" Jake repeated, confusion clouding his mind. "Where? Who are you?" "We are the Zariths," Narya said, her voice carrying a weight that Jake couldn't ignore. "Warriors from a distant world. We are bound by honor, and our mission is one of survival."
"You will not understand it all yet,
"But you will in time." Zariths? He had never heard of them? He had heard stories of alien races, but nothing like this, nothing that matched the strength and power he saw in the women surrounding him. He was just a man, a simple man, far from the reaches of any galactic conflict. How had he become involved in something so vast, so dangerous? "I don't want any part of this," Jake said, shaking his head. "I don't know what you want, but I didn't ask for it." "I helped you, that's all." Narya's expression softened, but there was a trace of sadness in her eyes. "You have no choice, Jake. The moment you saved me, you made that choice. Our fates are now linked." Jake swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words press down on him. The warriors behind Narya stood still, watching him with quiet intensity. There was no escape, no way to turn back. He had been thrust into something far beyond his control. "I don't understand," Jake said again, his voice tinged with frustration. "I don't know what this means." "You will," Narya said, her voice steady. "In time, you will understand. You will see the truth of what is happening. But for now, all I ask is that you come with us." "There is much for you to learn, much for you to understand." Jake's mind raced, but there was no denying the truth of her words. Whatever had happened, whatever was unfolding, he was now a part of it. The desert, his hut, his simple life. It all felt distant now, as if they were fading into the past. "I'll go with you," Jake said finally, his voice firm, though his heart pounded in his chest. "But I need to know more."
I can't just follow you without understanding what's going on."
Narya smiled faintly. "That is all I ask, Jake. Come with us, and you will learn what you need to know." And with that, she turned, signaling for the warriors to move. Jake stood there watching as the group of women began to walk away, their movements as fluid and synchronized as a single entity. He didn't know where they were going, what they were doing, or what had just happened to his life. But he knew one thing. It was no longer just his own. He had been swept into something larger, something beyond his understanding. With a deep breath, Jake followed them, his mind full of questions, his heart filled with uncertainty. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. He was no longer just a man in the desert. He was now part of something that would change his life forever. Jake walked behind Naria and the group of women, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. As they moved through the desert, the landscape stretched before them, endless, barren, and unforgiving. The air was thick with dust, and each step seemed to sink deeper into the quiet, isolated world he had once known. He had never felt more out of place, yet more connected to something larger than himself. What had he gotten himself into? The warriors walked with purpose, their steps synchronized and their expressions focused. They moved as one, and Jake felt small in their presence. It wasn't just their strength that made them stand out. It was their aura. There was something about them that radiated power, yet also a deep sense of respect for one another. They didn't speak much, but when they did, their voices were calm, commanding. Jake could tell that they had a bond, something deeper than what he had ever experienced. And Naria, the woman he had saved, was the heart of it all. He had learned little about her since she woke up. She had told him her name, but beyond that, there was only silence. She didn't seem eager to explain anything about her people, and Jake wasn't sure if he should push her. He could tell that there was more to her story than she was letting on, but he didn't know how to ask without seeming intrusive. Instead, he kept walking, keeping his questions to himself. For now, they moved through the desert for hours, the sun beating down on them relentlessly. Jake was used to the heat, but the weariness of the journey was starting to settle in. His legs ached from walking, his throat dry from the dust. The warriors, however, didn't seem affected. They walked with the ease of people who had endured this environment for a lifetime, and Jake couldn't help but wonder just how much of a life they had led. By midday, they reached a small outcropping of rocks that offered some shade. Naria signaled for them to stop, and the warriors immediately began setting up camp.
Jake, still unsure of what was going on, remained in the background, observing.
He hadn't been told where they were going or what their mission was, but he knew it had to be important. The fact that these women had come all this way, with him in tow, meant something. But what? Naria approached him after a few moments, her eyes locked on his. "Sit with me," she said softly, gesturing to the ground beside her. There was an urgency in her voice now, something that Jake couldn't ignore. He nodded and took a seat next to her, feeling the weight of her gaze.
"You have questions," Naria said, her voice low and steady.
"I know that, but I cannot tell you everything yet."
Not until the time is right. Jake looked at her, a mixture of curiosity and frustration bubbling inside him. "Then why bring me along? Why not leave me behind if you can't tell me anything?" She met his gaze evenly, her expression soft but unyielding. "Because you are a part of this now," she said. "Whether you understand it or not, you are connected to us."
"You saved me, Jake, and by doing that, you sealed your fate."
Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. He didn't want to be a part of anything. He didn't want to be dragged into a conflict that he didn't understand. But he couldn't deny the truth in her words. He had saved her, and in doing so, he had become tied to her world, her mission, her people. There was no turning back. "I don't understand," Jake said quietly. "I'm just a man."
"I don't belong here with you. I'm not a warrior."
"I don't know what you're fighting for, or why you brought me into it." Naria's expression softened, and for the first time since he had met her, she seemed vulnerable. "You are not just a man, Jake. You are someone who acted when others wouldn't. That is why we have brought you with us. You may not be a warrior, but you have something far more valuable. You have something that we need. Jake's mind raced. What could I possibly have that you need? I'm just trying to survive out here. I don't know anything about your people or your mission. I don't even know who your enemies are. Narya sighed, her eyes searching the horizon as if she was looking for something beyond the desert.
You will know soon enough.
But not today. We must continue our journey.
We cannot afford to stay in one place for too long. Jake didn't press her further.
There was a finality in her tone that told him not to ask any more questions. Instead, he sat in silence, watching the warriors as they prepared their camp. They worked together, efficient and swift, as if they had done this countless times before. It was clear that they weren't just a group of strangers. They were a team, bound by something greater than just survival. They had a purpose, a goal, and Jake had no choice but to follow along for now. The night fell quickly, the temperature dropping as the stars appeared overhead, shimmering like diamonds in the dark sky. Jake lay on his bedroll, staring up at the sky, his thoughts swirling. He couldn't shake the feeling that everything he had known up until now had been a lie. He had lived his life thinking he was just another man in the desert, struggling to get by. But now his life was something more. His fate was tied to these women, to Narya, to a cause he didn't fully understand. In the darkness, he heard soft voices whispering around him, the warriors speaking in their strange language. He tried to make sense of the words, but they were foreign to him. All he could do was listen, trying to pick up any hints, any clues about what was happening. But there were no answers, only the soft murmur of voices in the night. Eventually, sleep claimed him, and the world faded away. When Jake woke the next morning, the camp was already packed up. Narya and the warriors were ready to move. There was no time for breakfast, no time for rest. The journey had to continue. They set off again, this time heading east toward the mountains. Jake followed without question, his mind still reeling from everything that had happened. The desert was endless, and so were the questions in his head. But he knew one thing. He couldn't turn back. He had made a choice, whether he realized it or not, and there was no going back now. As they walked, Narya finally spoke again, her voice cutting through the silence. We are headed to a place of great importance. It is where we will meet with others of our kind. You will meet them too. Jake's curiosity piqued, but he didn't ask any more questions. The silence between them grew, comfortable, yet filled with unspoken words. There was so much more to learn, so much more to understand. But for now, he had no choice but to follow and see where this journey would take him. As they neared the mountains, Jake's thoughts began to settle. He wasn't sure what lay ahead, but he knew that whatever it was, he would face it. He had already crossed a line he could never uncross. Whatever he had gotten himself into, he would see it through. And so, with no clear answers, Jake followed Narya and the warriors into the unknown, ready for whatever came next. The journey continued as Jake walked silently behind Narya and the warriors, their steps leading them further into the rugged, rocky terrain. The mountain range loomed ahead, casting long shadows over the land as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The heat of the desert was still with them, but it was different here, in the foothills of the mountains. The air was cooler, the wind sharper, and the dust less thick. It was a welcome change, though Jake still felt the weight of the journey pressing down on him. For days they had traveled in silence, only the soft clatter of boots against the earth, breaking the quiet. Jake had so many questions, but he didn't dare ask them. He knew that Narya and the warriors were not yet ready to share the truth with him. He could feel the tension in the air, the knowledge that something important was coming, something that would finally reveal the purpose of his strange involvement in their world. He had tried to focus on the landscape, on the unfamiliar beauty of the land around him, but his mind kept drifting back to Narya. She was always just ahead of him, her silver hair glinting in the sun, her posture straight and commanding. She never looked back, never acknowledged him unless she absolutely had to. It was as if she were leading him to something, but the destination was still a mystery. They had crossed narrow canyons and climbed steep hills, the journey growing more difficult with each passing day. But Jake pushed through, his body sore and tired, driven by an unknown force that he couldn't name. The deeper they went into the mountains, the more the landscape seemed to change. The rocks grew jagged and sharp, the paths narrower, and the air thinner. It felt as though they were heading into the heart of something ancient, something powerful. One evening, as the group set up camp in a small valley surrounded by towering cliffs, Jake felt a strange sense of foreboding. The sky was darkening rapidly, the stars just beginning to appear in the distance. The warriors moved with quiet efficiency, setting up their tents and building a fire.
Narya was speaking with one of them, her voice low, but Jake couldn't make out the words. He sat on a large rock, watching them, waiting for the moment when she would finally tell him what was going on.
It was then that he felt a presence behind him. He turned to see Narya standing there, her eyes fixed on him. She was no longer the distant, aloof figure she had been at the start of the journey. There was something different about her now, a sense of urgency, of importance. Jake stood up, not knowing what to expect, but his heart was racing in his chest. "Jake," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper, "the time has come for you to understand." Her words hung in the air, and Jake felt a chill run through him. He had known that this moment was coming, but now that it was here, he felt unprepared. He had walked alongside Narya for days, and still, she had not told him what they were fighting for, what their mission was, or why he had been chosen to accompany them.
"Understand what?" he asked, his voice shaky.
Narya glanced around, making sure no one else was listening. She took a step closer to him, her face serious.
"Our people are in danger," she said quietly. "And now, so are you."
He had expected answers, but not like this. Danger? He had known there was something more to all of this, but the weight of her words hit him hard.
"What kind of danger?"
"What's going on?" Narya took a deep breath, her eyes hardening. "We are part of a great war, Jake. A war that spans across the stars, beyond this planet. We are the last of our kind. The Zariths, and we fight to protect our people, to ensure our survival." Jake's mind was racing, trying to process the information, a war that spanned across the stars. He couldn't even fathom what that meant. He had lived his whole life on this barren desert planet, far removed from the world of intergalactic conflict. Now, suddenly, he was thrust into the middle of it. "But why me?" Jake asked, shaking his head.
"Why am I here? I'm just a man."
"I don't know anything about this kind of war. I can't help you."
"You've already helped," Narya said, her voice steady.
"By saving me, you've already shown that you have the strength we need. You may not know it, but your actions have made you a part of something far greater than yourself." He had never thought of himself as anything special. He was just a man who had lived alone, keeping to himself. He had never been involved in any kind of fight, let alone a war. Yet here he was, tangled up in something he couldn't even understand. "There's more," Narya continued, her gaze softening for a moment. "The enemy we face is not just any foe. They are ruthless, powerful, and they will stop at nothing to destroy us. We are the last hope for our people."
"Without us, there will be no future."
He had never thought of himself as a hero, and he certainly didn't feel like one now. But Narya was looking at him with such intensity, such certainty, that he felt he couldn't back away from it. Whatever this was, it was bigger than him, and there was no turning back now. "So, what do I have to do?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me?" Narya looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing his words.
"We need you to come with us. There is a place, an ancient stronghold where the last of our people are gathering."
"You will meet with them, and together we will prepare to face our enemies. Jake felt a surge of determination he hadn't known was inside him. He didn't fully understand what was happening. But he knew one thing. He couldn't back out now. His life had been changed the moment he had saved Narya. And if there was any chance to help, any chance to make a difference, he had to take it. "I'll go with you," Jake said firmly.
"I'll do whatever I can." Narya gave him a small nod, as if she had expected no less from him. "Then come."
The journey is not over yet. The hardest part is still ahead.
And with that, the two of them turned back to the camp. The warriors were preparing to move again, their movements swift and practiced. Jake followed behind Narya, his mind still reeling from the revelations she had shared with him. A war? An ancient stronghold? He couldn't imagine what lay ahead. But one thing was clear. His life would never be the same again. As they walked through the valley, the mountains towering above them, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was part of something far larger than he could comprehend. He was no longer just a man wandering through the desert. He was now part of a battle for survival, for the future of a people he had never known. And as the sun set behind the mountains, casting the world in a warm, golden light, Jake knew that whatever happened next, he would face it, head on. There was no going back.